Puebla, Mexico. March 15, 2019. A 4-year-old boy walks down the hallways of the General Hospital with his mother, Maria Elena Vasquez. The little one had just come out of emergency surgery after a domestic accident that nearly cost him his life. The doctors said it was a miracle he survived. But what happened in the next 48 hours would change this family's life forever and challenge everything we know about life, death, and human consciousness. Because when little Diego woke up fully from the anesthesia, he was no longer the same child. His first words froze everyone's blood in the room. "Mom, I died, but not here. I died before, when I was Carlos," he said. "The bullet entered here," and he pointed directly to his chest, exactly at the heart. His mother thought it was post-surgery delirium. The doctors tried to explain it as temporary mental confusion. But Diego continued. "I was 23. It was 1987 and I worked at the civil hospital in Guadalajara. Do you remember me, Mom? Did you cry a lot when I died?" Maria Elena had never been to Guadalajara, had never known anyone named Carlos. And her 4-year-old son Diego shouldn't have known what year he was living in, let alone specific details about a hospital 1,000 kilometers away. But this was just the beginning of the most documented reincarnation story ever recorded in Mexico. A story that would involve doctors, psychologists, forensic investigators, and that would be studied by the National Autonomous University for more than 3 years. A story that you are about to hear, and it will forever change your perspective on the mysteries of human consciousness. Because what Diego would reveal in the coming days wasn't just impossible, it was verifiable. To understand what happened to Diego, we need to go back 3 days before the accident. Diego Vasquez was a completely normal child. He played with cars, watched cartoons, and like any other 4-year-old, his biggest concern was choosing between chocolate or vanilla ice cream. He spoke only basic Spanish, and he had never shown any interest in hospitals, medicine, or anything related. He was the only child of Maria Elena, a 31-year-old seamstress, and Jose Vasquez, a mechanic. They were a simple, working-class family living in a small apartment in the San Manuel neighborhood. None of them. Diego's parents had no medical training. They had never lived outside Puebla. But on the morning of March 12th, Diego suffered an accidental fall from the internal stairs of the building. He had a head trauma and lost a significant amount of blood. The paramedics said he had stopped breathing for nearly 2 minutes during transport. At the General Hospital, the emergency team worked for hours to stabilize him. The surgery lasted 5 hours. During the procedure, Diego went into cardiac arrest twice. Twice he was revived. And it was immediately after the second resuscitation that everything changed. When Diego finally opened his eyes, 3 days later, he didn't ask for his mother, didn't ask for water, didn't cry like any other child would. He said, "Doctor, where are the other injured? The shooting was very serious. I need to help." Nurse supervisor Carmen Morales, who has worked for 20 years in pediatric emergency, says she had never seen anything like it. A 4-year-old child using precise medical terminology, asking about multiple injuries and trauma protocols was impossible. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. Because Diego hadn't just changed his personality. He had become someone else, with memories, knowledge, and a history that belonged to someone who died 32 years before he was born. On the 4th day of hospitalization, something happened that made the medical team at the General Hospital stop everything they were doing. Diego was being examined by Dr. Roberto Mendoza, a pediatric neurologist with 15 years of experience. It was a routine exam to assess possible neurological sequelae from the trauma. Standard procedure. But when the doctor started testing Diego's reflexes, the child looked directly at him and said, "Doctor, you're doing it wrong. To assess post-traumatic neurological injury, you need to start with the pupillary reflexes with direct light, then test the corneal blink reflex and only then proceed to deep tendon reflexes. It's basic neurology protocol." Dr. Mendoza was in absolute shock, not only because the 4-year-old child perfectly pronounced the technical terms, but also because Diego was right, completely right. It was as if he were conversing with a fellow doctor, says Dr. Mendoza. He knew terminologies that even third-year medical students don't master. He spoke with authority on things that took me years to learn. But Diego didn't stop there. He looked at the doctor's stethoscope and said, "That model is old, doctor." At the civil hospital in Guadalajara, where I worked, we used the Littman cardiology treasuris, much better for detecting heart murmurs in polytraumatized patients. Dr. Mendoza nearly dropped the stethoscope. First, how could a 4-year-old child know about different stethoscope models? Second, the Littman cardiology sera was released in 1999, long after 1987, the year Diego constantly mentioned. "But doctor," Diego continued, "you seem worried." "I know it's hard to believe, but I really worked there. I was a second-year resident, specializing in emergency and trauma. My supervisor was Dr. Hernandez. Dr. Miguel Hernandez had a scar on his left hand from an accident he had when he was an intern. At that moment, Dr. Mendoza made a decision that would change everything. He took his cell phone and called the civil hospital in Guadalajara. Not to verify if Diego was telling the truth. That seemed impossible. But to prove that the boy was delirious. The response he received made his blood run cold because what he discovered on the other end of the line wasn't just possible. It was documented. Dr. Mendoza's call to the civil hospital in Guadalajara changed everything. On the other end of the line, the medical records secretary confirmed, "Yes, doctor. We have a record of a resident named Carlos Mendoza Garcia, second-year resident in emergency and trauma. He passed away in July 1987. And yes, his supervisor was really Dr. Miguel Hernandez. And yes, Dr. Hernandez had a visible scar on his left hand." When Dr. Mendoza hung up the phone, his hands were shaking. He immediately called Diego's parents and explained the impossible. Their son, Diego, a 4-year-old child, had just provided accurate information about a doctor who died 32 years before he was born. Maria Elena and Jose couldn't process the information. How was this possible? How did Diego know things they didn't even know? And why was he so insistent about needing to go back home to Guadalajara? For 3 days, Diego became increasingly agitated. He wasn't eating well, wasn't sleeping, and kept repeating, "I need to go home. My family is waiting for me. They don't know I'm okay." That was when Maria Elena made the hardest decision of her life. "If this can bring peace to my son," she said, "we'll go to Guadalajara." The 7-hour drive was intense. Diego, who had never left Puebla, began giving specific directions as soon as they entered the city. "Turn right on Avenida Juarez, now left on Calle Morelos. The house is the third one on the corner, the blue one with the white gate." Jose followed the directions skeptically. How could a child know streets in a city he had never visited? How could a child never visited? But when they arrived at the address Diego gave, everyone fell silent. There it was, exactly as Diego had described, a blue house with a white gate, and in the front yard, an elderly woman watering the plants. Diego got out of the car, ran to her, and said, "Mom Rosa, I'm back. It's me, Carlos. I didn't really die." The woman dropped the watering can because that was Rosa Garcia, 74 years old, and Carlos Mendoza Garcia had been her son. The son who tragically died in 1987 at the age of 23, a victim of a shooting at the hospital where he worked. The son she had cried for 32 years, and now he was standing before her in the eyes and voice of a 4-year-old child she had never met. But the most disturbing part was yet to come. What happened at the house on Calle Morelos number 237 defied any logical explanation. Still in shock, Rosa Garcia invited the family inside. Her hands were trembling as she opened the gate. Diego entered like it was his own home. "Mom Rosa, you moved the living room," Diego said, looking around. The TV was placed next to the window, and the brown sofa was turned toward the wall, not in the center. Rosa nearly fainted. "How? How do you know that?" she asked. "I changed the furniture just 2 years ago." Carlos had died over 30 years ago, but Diego continued to walk through the house with a terrifying familiarity. "My room was the second hall to the right." The bed was under the window because I like to look at the stars before falling asleep. He stopped at the door to the room and said, "Can I come in?" Rosa opened the door with trembling hands. The room was exactly as Carlos had left it. She had never had the courage to touch anything. Diego went straight to a drawer in the dresser. "Here are my things," he said, opening the drawer. Inside were medical diplomas, a stethoscope, and a graduation photo of Carlos at 21, and here Diego pointed under the bed. "Here's my emergency bag." Jose Diego's father crouched down and pulled out a dusty medical bag. Inside were medical equipment from the Gades, expired medications, and a hospital ID with the name Carlos Mendoza Garcia, emergency resident. But the most shocking discovery came when Diego went to the bathroom. "There's an envelope behind the bathroom mirror," he said, "with photos of a girl. I never told anyone because she was married." Rosa was confused. "Carlos never talked to me about any girl." Diego climbed onto a chair, removed the mirror, and exactly where he had said, there was a yellowed envelope. Inside were 12 photos of a young brunette with romantic dedications on the back for Carlos. "With all my love, Ana Maria" letters. Rosa began to cry. Ana Maria was a nurse at the hospital. She came to the funeral. She had said they were just colleagues. But Diego didn't stop. In the backyard, under the big mango tree, I buried a metal box with the letters she wrote me. 10 minutes later, Jose and Rosa were digging exactly where Diego had pointed. At a depth of 1 meter, they found a small, rusted metal box. Inside were 27 love letters from Ana Maria to Carlos, all dated between January and June 1987. The last letter was dated July 15, 1987. 3 days before Carlos's death, and it said, "My love, I can't hide this from my husband anymore. I will tell him everything tomorrow. If he forgives me, we can be together. I love you, Carlos." Diego looked at Rosa and said, "She never told you, Mom, because I died before." The next day, Rosa Garcia made a brave decision. She called the civil hospital in Guadalajara and asked to speak to someone from the medical archives. "I need information about my son Carlos Mendoza Garcia. He died here in 1987. The medical archive secretary, Patricia Herrera, who had worked at the hospital for 35 years, immediately recalled the case. "Ah yes, the resident who died in the shooting on July 18th, a terrible case. I have all the documents here." Rosa asked if she could go there with her family, including Diego. She needed to understand what was happening. 2 hours later, in the medical archives of the civil hospital, Patricia Herrera spread out all the documents related to Carlos Mendoza Garcia's death on the table: death certificate, autopsy reports, witness statements, crime scene photos. "It was a robbery," explained Patricia. 2 armed men entered the emergency room at 11:47 p.m. Carlos was on duty. When they tried to steal controlled medications, he reacted to protect the patients. Diego, who had been quietly playing with a toy, lifted his eyes and said, "The man in the red shirt had a scorpion tattoo on his right arm. The other one was shorter and limped on his left leg. They didn't want to hurt anyone at first." Patricia froze. Slowly, she took the police statement from a nurse who had witnessed the crime. 2 individuals. One wearing a red shirt with a visible scorpion tattoo on the right arm. The second was short and limped on the left leg. The document had been there for 32 years, word for word the same as what Diego had just said. "But there's more," Diego continued. "When the man in the red shirt saw me trying to protect Mrs. Esperanza, she was in room 12 with pneumonia. He yelled, 'Get out, doctor.' I said, 'I won't let you hurt her.' That's when he shot me." Patricia, trembling, looked for another document. Patient statement. Esperanza Morales, 67 years old, room 12, hospitalized with pneumonia. "Dr. Carlos stood in front of my bed. He said he wouldn't let them hurt me. The bandit yelled at him to move. The doctor didn't move. Then the man shot him." Diego looked at the papers and pointed to a black and white photo. "That's Mrs. Esperanza. She had a rosary in her hand. She used to pray quietly all through the night." Rosa began to cry. These weren't tears of sadness. They were the tears of a mother who finally understood that her son had died as a hero, and that, in some impossible way, he had come back to tell a story. But the hospital records revealed something even more extraordinary. What Patricia Herrera showed next left the whole family in shock. "Is there something else?" she asked, taking a special folder from the archive. "Something very few people know." Carlos left a recording. It was an old microcassette dated July 17, 1987, a day before his death. Carlos had a habit of recording medical notes about complex cases. This was the last recording he made. It was never included in the case because, well, you'll understand. Patricia put the microcassette in an old device and pressed play. Carlos' voice, that of a 23-year-old young man, echoed through the room. Personal notes. Carlos Mendoza Garcia. July 17, 1987, 8:30 p.m. I just finished my shift and I'm worried. There's something strange happening in the hospital. Suspicious movement in the controlled medications area. 2 men were here yesterday asking about security protocols. Diego, who had been playing with a pencil, immediately stopped and looked at the recorder. One of them had a scorpion tattoo on his right arm, the other limped on his left leg. They pretended to be health ministry inspectors, but something wasn't right. "I'm going to notify security tomorrow." The voice stopped. Everyone was in complete silence. Then Diego approached the recorder and said, "Can I speak?" Rosa nodded, still processing what she had just heard. Diego spoke directly into the microphone as if conversing with an old friend. "Carlos, it's me. Or rather, it's us. You couldn't notify security, remember? They came back the next day, just when you were looking after Mrs. Esperanza." Patricia turned the recorder back on. And what happened next was recorded and later studied by paranormal experts at the National University. Because when Diego continued speaking, a second voice began to answer through the recorder. "I can hear you. How is this possible?" It was Carlos' voice, but Carlos had died 32 years ago, and the recorder was playing a conversation that ... At that exact moment, the recording continued. "It's possible, because we are the same soul," Diego responded. "You didn't really die. You came with me. That's why I remember everything. Ana Maria received my letter. You didn't die before she could tell her husband, but she really loved you, Carlos. She cried at your funeral, and Mom Rosa, it's okay. She kept your room exactly the same and loves you so much." The conversation lasted exactly 7 minutes and 23 seconds. It was fully recorded by Patricia Herrera and later analyzed by forensic audio technicians. The analysis confirmed that there were 2 distinct voices, one from a 4-year-old child, the other from a young man, which was impossible to have been fabricated with 2019 technology. But the most impressive part of the recording came at the end. Carlos's voice continued through the recorder, revealing something that would change everything. "Diego, I didn't come back just to say goodbye. I came back because there's something that needs to be fixed. Something only you can do now." Diego moved even closer to the microphone. "What is it, Carlos?" "My body. I was never buried in the right place. There was an error at the cemetery. My tombstone is at grave 247. Section C, but my body was buried 50 meters to the north in grave 312. Section D, no tombstone, no identification." Rosa was confused. "What do you mean?" "I was at the burial." "You were buried where the stone is." Carlos's voice responded. "There were 2 burials that day, Mom. The gravedigger mixed up the bodies. The man in grave 312 is in my place. And I'm in his." Diego then said something that left everyone frozen. "In grave 312. Section D, exactly 2.3 meters deep. You'll find a brown coffin with gold fittings. Inside, besides the body, there's a graduation ring from the Guadalajara Medical School with the initials CMG engraved inside." Patricia Herrera frantically wrote everything down. How? How does a 4-year-old child know? How do you know such precise measurements?" Rosa asked. "Because I am Carlos," Diego answered simply. and I need to rest in the right place so I can continue in peace. But the most impressive revelation was still to come. In the coffin, besides the ring, you will find a letter. I wrote it for Anna Maria the night before I died, but I could never deliver it. It's in the inner pocket of the blue jacket I was wearing. 2 days later, Rosa obtained judicial authorization for the exhumation of grave 312 at the Guadalajara Municipal Cemetery. The coordinates provided by Diego were followed to the letter. Exactly 2.3 meters deep, the gravediggers found a brown coffin with gold fittings. When they opened it, the impossible became reality. There was the body of a young man, in astonishingly good condition for being buried for 32 years. He was wearing a blue jacket. On his left hand, there was a graduation ring from the Guadalajara Medical School, and inside the ring were the initials CMG engraved in microscopic lettering. In the inner pocket of the jacket, exactly where Diego had said, was a sealed envelope with Ana Maria handwritten on it. The forensic experts confirmed it was indeed Carlos Mendoza Garcia. The fingerprints matched the hospital records from 1987. Rosa opened the letter, in the presence of authorities and family members. My dear Ana Maria, if you are reading this, it means I didn't survive. I want you to know that you were the love of my life. Don't blame yourself for anything, and be happy. Wherever I am, I will always be watching over you with all my eternal love. Carlos. Diego, who had been watching in silence, approached the coffin and said, "Now I can rest in peace. Thank you for helping me get here." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. A deep sense of peace overcame everyone present, and for the first time in 32 years, Carlos Mendoza Garcia was buried in the right place, with his tombstone next to his family. But the story of Diego still had one last chapter, the most important of all. 3 weeks after Carlos's burial, something extraordinary happened at Rosa Garcia house. Diego had returned to Puebla with his parents, but he continued calling Rosa every day. The conversations always ended the same way. "Mom, Rosa, I need to go back there. There's someone I need to find." When Rosa asked who, Diego always, "You'll know when she arrives," Diego responded. And on the morning of April 15, 2019, exactly 1 month after Diego's accident, someone rang the doorbell of the house on Morelos Street. Rosa opened the door to find a woman, about 55 years old, with gray hair, holding a bouquet of white flowers. "Excuse me for disturbing you, Mom," the woman said. "My name is Ana Maria Herrera. I worked with your son Carlos at the hospital. I heard they found a letter." Rosa almost fainted. Ana Maria, the nurse from the secret love affair, had returned after 32 years. "Please come in," Rosa said, still processing the impossible coincidence. Ana Maria entered the living room and began to explain. "I got married, had children, built a life, but I could never forget Carlos. When I heard in the news about the exhumation and the letter, I had to come." At that moment, the phone rang. It was Diego calling from Puebla. "Mom, Rosa, she arrived, right, Ana Maria?" Rosa froze. How could Diego know? She thought. "How do you know?" "Because Carlos told me she would come today. She's here next to me. He wants to talk to her." Rosa handed the phone to Ana Maria, who was trembling. "Hello." Diego's voice came through the phone, but the tone, the intonation, was completely different. It was Carlos's voice. "Ana Maria, my love, you look more beautiful than I remembered." Ana Maria began to cry uncontrollably. "Carlos, is it really you?" "Yes, it's me, my love. I received your letter, the one from July 15th. I really wanted to talk about our future." "Carlos, I'm so sorry. I should have told my husband sooner, but I couldn't." "Don't blame yourself, Ana. You did what you thought was right. And I understand. I always understood." The conversation lasted 45 minutes. Ana Maria and Carlos talked about everything. The plans they had, the children she had, the life he never got to live. In the end, Carlos said, "Ana, I need to ask you something. You have a 28-year-old son, Miguel, who's studying medicine, right?" Ana Maria was frightened. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been watching over him, even without you knowing. He's going to graduate next year and he's going to be an amazing doctor, just like his father. His father, Ana. Miguel is not your husband's son, he is my son, our son. The silence was absolute. You got pregnant 2 weeks before I died. Do you remember our last night? Did we stay together in the apartment on Cale Hidalgo? Ana Maria was sobbing. I always knew. Miguel has your eyes, your way of speaking, but I was never certain. He is our son, Ana, and he needs to know the truth. Not to destroy your family, but to understand why he always felt different. Why he always wanted to be a doctor, even though there were no doctors in your husband's family. Carlos said, "Tell him that his biological father died a hero, that I love him more than anything. And I'm proud of the man he became." When the call ended, Ana Maria was transformed. She had spent 32 years carrying a secret, and now she could finally free not only herself but also her son, who never knew who his real father was. But the most impressive revelation was still to come. Because Miguel Herrera, Ana Maria's son, was at that exact moment finishing his medical residency in emergency and trauma at the Civil Hospital of Guadalajara, the very place where his father had died 32 years earlier. The case of Diego Vasquez reached the ears of Dr. Carmen Mendoza, a psychiatrist specializing in consciousness phenomena from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. For 6 months, she and her team meticulously studied every aspect of the story. Audio recordings were analyzed by forensic specialists. Medical documents were verified by 3 independent institutions. Witnesses were interviewed under strict scientific protocols. The result was a 247-page study published in the Mexican Journal of Paranormal Research in December 2019. The conclusions were revolutionary. Diego Vasquez demonstrates medical knowledge impossible for his age and training. He possesses verifiable information about events that occurred 32 years before his birth. He shows abilities that challenge current models of consciousness and memory. But the most impressive part was what happened during the studies themselves. Researchers visiting Diego in Puebla began reporting strange experiences. Some recounted vivid dreams of a young doctor. Others mentioned a sensation of presence during the interviews. Dr. Carmen Mendoza confessed, "In 25 years of studying paranormal phenomena, I've never seen anything like this case. It's as if Carlos was truly present, guiding the revelations through Diego. And in fact, Diego continued providing precise information. He revealed that at the Civil Hospital in Guadalajara, there was a secret file containing unresolved cases from 1987. The file was found exactly as he indicated. There were 17 cases of suspicious deaths that had never been properly investigated, including Carlos's. He provided the full names and addresses of the 2 criminals who killed Carlos. Both had already passed away, but the information perfectly matched police investigations from the time. He described with surgical precision the original layout of the civil hospital in 1987, before the 1991 reforms. Details that only someone who worked there could know. But the most definitive proof came when Miguel Herrera, Ana Maria's son, agreed to take a DNA test. The results confirmed that Miguel was indeed the biological son of Carlos Mendoza Garcia. When Miguel learned the truth, he had a surprising reaction. "I always knew there was something different about me," he said. "As a child, I had recurring dreams of a hospital with medical emergencies. Now I understand why." The full story was documented and is now part of the official archives of the National University. The case is being studied by researchers from all over the world as one of the most solid pieces of evidence of reincarnation ever recorded. Diego, now 7 years old, continues to live normally with his parents in Puebla. Carlos's memories have gradually faded as if the mission had been fulfilled. He still visits Rosa Garcia monthly. He plays in the garden where he once found the buried box, but now he is just an ordinary child, without the memories that once tormented him. Ana Maria reconciled with her past and told her family the entire truth. Miguel changed his surname to Miguel Mendoza Herrera, and today works as a doctor at the Civil Hospital of Guadalajara, honoring the memory of the father he never knew. Rosa Garcia, at 76 years old, finally found peace. My son came back to fix what was left unfinished, she says. Now he can rest, and so can I. This was the first verified case of reincarnation in Mexico. But according to the National University, there are other similar cases being investigated across the country. Cases of children who remember past lives with details impossible to know. And do you believe that human consciousness can survive physical death and return in a new body? The next case may be closer to you than you think.